Blood stained the dust at Sarah Blackwell's feet, seeping from the wound in her shoulder as she stood with her back against the canyon wall. 4 armed men advancing toward her with predatory grins. The year was 1878, and the territory of Arizona was as unforgiving as the men who sought to claim it and her. "Nowhere left to run, pretty lady," the largest of the bandits sneered, his gold tooth catching the late afternoon sun. "Hand over that deed, and maybe we'll let you walk out of here alive." Sarah clutched the leather pouch containing the papers to her family's silver mine claimed tighter against her chest. "This land belongs to my father. He died finding this silver, and I won't dishonor his memory by giving it to thieves." The bandits laughed, a harsh sound echoing off the red rock walls of Rustler's Canyon, 20 miles outside of the small settlement of Sweetwater, Arizona Territory. "Your pa ain't here to protect you anymore," another bandit said, stepping closer, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip. "And that silver's gonna fetch a mighty fine price." Sarah felt blood trickling down her arm. The bullet had only grazed her, but the pain was intense, and she was outnumbered. The horse they'd shot out from under her lay dead 50 yards back. Her own pistol had only 1 bullet left, not nearly enough for the 4 men closing in. The sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the tension. "Step away from the lady." The voice was deep, steady as iron. All heads turned to the ridge above, where a lone figure sat astride a midnight black stallion, rifle aimed at the group below. The lead bandit spat tobacco juice into the dust. "This ain't your fight, stranger." "It is now," the man said, guiding his horse down the steep path into the canyon. As he drew closer, Sarah could make out his features' strong jawline darkened by stubble, eyes the color of a storm cloud beneath the brim of a worn Stetson, and shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the West itself. "You boys have exactly 10 seconds to mount up and ride out, or I start putting holes in things, important things, like your skulls." "There's 4 of us and 1 of you," the leader countered, but his voice lacked conviction. The stranger's lips curved into a slight smile. "I like those odds." A tense silence fell over the canyon as the bandits exchanged glances, measuring the threat. The stranger's rifle didn't waver, and something in his eyes, a cold certainty, made the bandits hesitate. 5 seconds, he warned. The leader of the gang finally raised his hands. "All right, we're going." But this ain't over. As the bandits slowly backed toward their horses, the stranger nudged his stallion forward, positioning himself between Sarah and the retreating men. Only when they had mounted up and ridden away, throwing dark glances over their shoulders, did the stranger lower his rifle and turn to Sarah. "You're hurt," he observed, dismounting in one fluid motion. "It's just a graze," Sarah replied, trying to sound stronger than she felt. The world was beginning to spin, and she realized she'd lost more blood than she'd thought. The stranger moved closer, and she caught the scent of leather and wilderness. His eyes, now that she could see them clearly, held a kindness that belied his dangerous demeanor. "I'm Zane Sullivan," he said, reaching into his saddlebag for a clean bandana. "You look like you could use some help, miss." "Blackwell, Sarah Blackwell," she managed before her knees buckled. Zane caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms wrapping securely around her waist. "You'll leave here beside me, Miss Blackwell," he said quietly. "Those men will be back, and you're in no condition to face them alone." As consciousness began to slip away, Sarah looked up into the face of the man who had just saved her life, wondering if she could trust him with the precious claim that had already cost her father his life and nearly cost her own. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Zane's expression softened. "Let's just say I've got a particular dislike for men who corner women in canyons." He adjusted his grip to support her better. "Now, let's get that shoulder tended to before you bleed all over my horse." The last thing Sarah remembered before darkness claimed her was being lifted onto Zane's stallion, the steady beat of his heart against her back as he mounted behind her, and his quiet voice promising her safety. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she found herself lying on a narrow cot in a small, rustic cabin. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. Her shoulder had been carefully bandaged, and someone had removed her dust-covered jacket and boots. "Welcome back," came Zane's voice from a chair beside the hearth. He stood, a tin cup in his hand, and approached the cot. How are you feeling? Sarah tried to sit up and winced at the sharp pain that shot through her shoulder. Like I've been trampled by a herd of wild mustangs. Zane's mouth quirked into a half smile. That's to be expected. You lost a fair amount of blood, but the bullet just grazed you. Clean wound. Should heal fine if you don't go getting yourself cornered by outlaws again. The deed, Sarah's hand flew to her side, panic rising in her chest. It's safe, Zane assured her, gesturing to the leather pouch on a nearby table. I didn't look inside, figured that was your business. Relief washed over her, followed quickly by suspicion. Years in the West had taught her that kindness often came with a price. Why did you help me? She asked, studying him closely. Zane handed her the cup, filled with warm coffee laced with whiskey. Drink this, it'll help with the pain. Sarah accepted the cup but didn't drink. You didn't answer my question. Zane sighed and returned to his chair. Those men are part of the Tucker gang. They've been terrorizing this territory for months, robbing stage coaches, rustling cattle, and worse. I've been tracking them. You're a lawman, used to be U.S. Marshal out of Santa Fe. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a jagged scar running from wrist to elbow. Until this happened. Now I hunt bounties. The Tuckers have prices on their heads that could set a man up for life. Sarah took a cautious sip of the coffee, the whiskey burning a warm path down her throat. So I was just convenient bait to draw them out. Zane's eyes hardened. No, madam. I would have stepped in regardless, but I won't deny their presence gives me an opportunity. They'll come back, Sarah said, more statement than question. Count on it. Those men want whatever's in that pouch badly enough to kill for it. Sarah stared into her cup. It's the deed to my father's silver mine. He spent 20 years searching for silver in these mountains. 6 months ago, he founded a vein so rich it could make us wealthy beyond imagination. Her voice caught. 3 weeks ago, he was murdered in his sleep. His partner, a man named Harlan Tucker, tried to claim he owned half the mine. When my father's will proved otherwise, Tucker disappeared. Harlan Tucker, Zane repeated, leaning forward. Brother to James Tucker, the leader of the gang. The man with the gold tooth, Sarah asked. Zane nodded. The same. Explains why they're after you. Family business. Sarah finished her coffee and set the cup aside. I need to get to Sweetwater. There's a banker there who can help me file the claim properly, make it official. Sweetwater's 2 days' ride and you're in no condition to travel, Zane pointed out. Besides, the Tucker gang will be watching the trails. I don't have a choice, Sarah argued. If I don't file this claim within the week, it becomes open territory again. Everything my father worked for died for will have been in vain. Zane studied her, admiration flickering in his eyes. You've got grit, Miss Blackwell, I'll give you that. Sarah, she corrected. If you're going to save my life and share your coffee, you might as well use my given name. A ghost of a smile played across his lips. Sarah, then. He stood and moved to the window, pushing aside the burlap curtain to peer into the gathering darkness. We'll leave at first light. I know these mountains better than the Tuckers. There's a trail they won't know about, harder going, but safer. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Like I said in the canyon, you'll leave here beside me. His gaze was steady. I aim to see you safely to Sweetwater and maybe collect on those bounties along the way. Sarah wanted to protest that she didn't need a protector, but the throbbing pain in her shoulder and the memory of those men surrounding her argued otherwise. Thank you, she said simply. Zane nodded once, then moved to a trunk at the foot of a second cot across the room. He pulled out a clean shirt and brought it to her. This will be too big, but your blouse is torn and bloodied. I'll step outside while you change. Try not to pull those bandages. When he had gone, Sarah carefully removed her ruined blouse, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. Zane's shirt engulfed her, the sleeves hanging well past her fingertips, but the soft cotton was clean and carried his scent: leather, pine, and something uniquely male that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with her injury. As she buttoned the shirt, she caught sight of a framed photograph on a small table near Zane's cot. Curiosity drew her to it, and she picked it up carefully. The image showed a younger Zane in a marshal's uniform standing beside a pretty woman in a wedding dress. They were smiling, his arm around her waist, her face tilted up toward his in unmistakable adoration. A wife, of course. A man like Zane Sullivan wouldn't be living alone in a mountain cabin without good reason. A soft knock at the door startled her. Decent, Zane called. Sarah hastily returned the photograph to the table. Yes, come in. He entered with an armful of firewood which he stacked beside the hearth. "Night gets cold up here," he explained, adding a few logs to the fire. "You should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." "What about you?" Sarah asked, noticing there were only the two cots. "I'll keep watch for a while," he said, checking his rifle before settling back into the chair by the fire. "Don't worry about me." Sarah returned to her cot, pulling the rough woolen blanket over herself. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as questions tumbled through her mind. Who exactly was Zane Sullivan? Where was his wife? And could she truly trust him with her life and her father's legacy? "Stop thinking so loud," Zane's voice came through the darkness, tinged with amusement. "I can practically hear the wheels turning in your head from here." "I saw the photograph," Sarah admitted. "Your wife is beautiful." A long silence followed, broken only by the crackling of the fire. When Zane finally spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. She was beautiful. "Elizabeth died 3 years ago. Cholera." Sarah closed her eyes, regret washing over her. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pried." "You didn't know." The firelight caught the angles of his face, highlighting the grief still etched there. "Get some rest, Sarah. Dawn comes early in these mountains." Sleep eventually claimed her, but not before she heard Zane move to the window again, standing vigilant guard against the dangers that lurked in the night, both the ones that threatened her life and, perhaps, the ones that threatened her heart. True to his word, Zane woke Sarah before dawn. Her shoulder ached fiercely as she rose, but she was determined not to show weakness. He provided her with a simple breakfast of hardtack and jerky, which they ate in companionable silence as the first gray light of dawn crept into the cabin. "How's the shoulder?" Zane asked as he checked her bandage, his touch clinical yet somehow intimate in the quiet morning. "It'll do," Sarah replied, trying not to flinch as he tightened the wrapping. "Tough lady," he remarked, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Your pa raised you right." "He had to," she said. "My mother died when I was 12. It was just the two of us after that, moving from one mining camp to another, following his dream." Zane nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Dreams can be expensive." "Too expensive sometimes," Sarah agreed, thinking of her father's unmarked grave. They packed quickly Zane's saddlebags with provisions and ammunition, and a small bundle with Sarah's few possessions. The deed remained secure in its leather pouch, now tucked inside her borrowed shirt. Outside, the mountain air was crisp and clean, the sky beginning to blush pink above the eastern ridges. Zane's black stallion stood saddled and ready, alongside a sturdy bay mare. "Bought her off a prospector headed east last month," Zane explained when Sarah expressed surprise at the second mount. "Thought she might come in handy someday." Sarah approached the mare, stroking her velvety muzzle. "She's beautiful. What's her name?" "Never gave her one," Zane said, securing their packs. "Figured whoever ended up riding her should do the naming." Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile since her ordeal began. "Then I'll call her Ruby for the color of these canyon walls." Zane helped Sarah mount, careful of her injured shoulder, then swung up onto his own horse. "The trail I'm taking you on isn't on any map," he explained as they set off. "It follows an old Apache hunting path through the high country. Rough going in places, but the Tuckers won't think to look for us there." They rode in silence for the first hour, climbing steadily through pine forests that gave way to rocky outcroppings. The trail, little more than a game path in places, wound around massive boulders and along precipitous ledges that dropped hundreds of feet to the valley below. Sarah found herself studying Zane's broad back as he led the way. There was an ease to the way he sat his horse, man and animal moving as one. His shoulders were tense, though, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings for danger. "You said you were a U.S. Marshal," Sarah ventured when they stopped to rest the horses. "What happened?" "If you don't mind my asking." Zane dismounted and helped Sarah down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Ambush," he said simply, leading the horses to a small spring bubbling from the rocks. "I was escorting a prisoner, a man named Calhoun, who'd murdered 3 people during a bank robbery. His gang caught up to us near the Texas border." He rolled up his sleeve again, revealing the scar. "Took a knife here, bullet in the leg," he tapped his thigh. "Calhoun escaped. I spent 6 months recovering, only to learn the Marshal's service had given my position to someone else, said I was no longer fit for duty." That's not fair, Sarah protested. Zane shrugged, though the set of his jaw suggested the dismissal still stung. Life rarely is, especially out here. He filled their canteens and handed one to Sarah. I tracked Calhoun down anyway, first bounty I ever collected. After that, it just seemed natural to keep going. Is that why you're after the Tuckers? Sarah asked. The bounty, Zane met her gaze steadily. Partly. They've hurt a lot of people, Sarah, killed more than a few. The money's good, but seeing justice done is better. There was something he wasn't saying, Sarah sensed, but before she could press further, Zane stiffened, his hand dropping to his revolver. What is it? Sarah whispered, alarm rippling through her. Zane put a finger to his lips, then pointed to a ridge above them. Sarah squinted against the sun and made out the silhouette of a rider watching them from above. Tucker's man, she breathed. Zane shook his head slightly. Apache. We're crossing their hunting grounds. Fear tightened Sarah's chest. Relations with the Apache had been strained for years, with raids and counter-raids bloodying the territory. Zane straightened and raised his hand, palm outward, in a gesture of peace. For several tense moments, the figure on the ridge remained motionless. Then, slowly, he raised his own hand in acknowledgement before wheeling his horse and disappearing over the ridge. What does that mean? Sarah asked. Means they'll let us pass, but they'll be watching, Zane said, already leading their horses back to the trail. We need to keep moving. I don't want to be in their territory after dark. They rode hard for the remainder of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit. By nightfall, they had descended into a sheltered valley where a small creek meandered through a meadow dotted with aspens. We'll camp here, Zane decided, helping Sarah dismount. The day's ride had taken its toll on her, her shoulder throbbed mercilessly, and exhaustion had settled deep in her bones. Zane set about making camp with practiced efficiency, securing the horses, gathering wood, and building a small, smokeless fire. He prepared a simple meal of beans and coffee, which they ate sitting side by side on a fallen log. Tell me about your father, Zane said suddenly. What kind of man was he? Sarah smiled, memories warming her more than the fire. Stubborn, determined. He could look at a mountainside and just know there was silver hiding inside it. Most people thought he was crazy, chasing dreams all those years, but he never gave up. Sounds like his daughter, Zane observed. Sarah ducked her head, pleased by the comparison. He taught me everything: how to shoot, how to ride, how to read the land. He used to say the West wasn't just a place, it was a promise. A promise of what? Freedom. A chance to build something that was truly yours. Sarah gazed into the fire, her voice softening. He wanted that mine to be our legacy, something that would last after we were gone. Zane was quiet for a moment. And what do you want, Sarah Blackwell? The question caught her off guard. For so long, her wants had been secondary to her father's dreams, then to survival after his death. I want to honor his memory, she said finally. Beyond that, she shrugged, then winced as pain shot through her shoulder. Here, Zane said, reaching into his saddlebag. He withdrew a small bottle of whiskey and offered it to her. For the pain. Sarah took a small sip, the liquor burning down to her stomach. What about you? What does Zane Sullivan want? He stared into the darkness beyond their campfire. Used to know, now I'm not so sure. He took the bottle when she handed it back, but didn't drink. After Elizabeth died, I just existed. Tracking bounties gave me purpose, kept me moving. And now, Zane's eyes met hers across the fire, their depths reflecting something that made her heart beat faster. Now I'm starting to remember there might be more to life than just surviving it. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Sarah looked away first, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how intimate the small circle of firelight had become. We should rest, Zane said finally, his voice rougher than before. I'll take first watch. He spread a bedroll for her near the fire, then positioned himself against a tree trunk, rifle across his knees, his silhouette a reassuring presence in the darkness. Despite her exhaustion, Sarah found sleep elusive again. Her shoulder ached, but more distracting was the awareness of Zane's presence just feet away and the memory of his eyes when he'd looked at her across the fire. Zane, she whispered into the darkness. Thank you for everything. She heard him shift slightly. Get some sleep, Sarah. This time she did. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sarah woke to find Zane already preparing coffee over a rekindled fire. "How's the shoulder?" he asked, handing her a steaming cup. Sarah rotated it cautiously. "Better, I think." "Still sore, but the bleeding stopped." Zane nodded approvingly. "Good. We should reach Sweetwater by nightfall if we push hard." As they rode that day, the terrain gradually changed from the rugged mountains to rolling foothills covered in sagebrush and juniper. Zane remained vigilant, frequently stopping to study their back trail or scan the horizon with a small brass spyglass. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" Sarah asked during one such pause. "Count on it," Zane replied grimly. James Tucker isn't the type to give up easily, especially with silver at stake. By mid-afternoon, they had descended into cattle country. In the distance, Sarah could make out a small herd grazing in a valley, cowboys on horseback moving among them. "We're getting close to civilization," she observed with relief. Zane seemed less enthusiastic. "Which means we need to be extra careful. The Tuckers have friends in these parts, ranchers who turn a blind eye to rustling in exchange for protection." They had just crested a rise when Zane suddenly reined in his horse, his body tensing. "What is it?" Sarah asked, immediately alert. "Riders," Zane said tersely, pointing to a dust cloud moving rapidly toward them from the east. "At least 4 of them coming fast." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "The Tuckers? Can't tell yet, but we're not waiting to find out." Zane wheeled his stallion around. "This way. There's a ravine about half a mile back that leads to a box canyon. It's defensible." They rode hard, the terrain blurring past as they pushed their mounts to the limit. Sarah could hear the thunder of pursuing hoofbeats growing steadily closer. "There," Zane shouted, pointing to a narrow opening in the rocky hillside. They plunged into the ravine, its high walls providing momentary cover from their pursuers. The passage widened into a small canyon, perhaps 50 yards across, with sheer rock walls on 3 sides. Zane led them to the far end, where a jumble of boulders provided natural cover. "Dismount," he ordered, already swinging off his stallion. "Get behind those rocks." Sarah did as instructed, wincing as her injured shoulder protested. Zane tied the horses in a protected alcove, then joined her, rifle at the ready. "If it's the Tuckers, I'll try to hold them off while you make a run for it," he said, checking his ammunition. "Sweetwater's only about 10 miles south. Stick to the main road once you reach it." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah protested. Zane turned to her, his expression fierce. "This isn't a debate, Sarah. Your father died protecting that claim. I'm not letting his sacrifice or yours be for nothing." Before Sarah could argue further, the sound of approaching riders echoed through the ravine. Zane positioned himself behind a boulder, rifle aimed at the canyon entrance. "Stay down," he whispered. Sarah crouched beside him, drawing her own pistol. 1 bullet left. If it came to it, she would make it count. 4 riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. They advanced slowly, rifles held ready. "Sullivan." A voice called out, "We know you're in there. Come on out and bring the girl with you." Zane didn't respond, just adjusted his aim slightly. "Last chance, Sullivan," the voice continued. "Hand over the deed and maybe we'll let you live." Sarah recognized the speaker now, James Tucker, his gold tooth glinting even at this distance. "Here's my counter-offer, Tucker," Zane called back. "Ride away now and I won't put a bullet between your eyes." Tucker's laugh echoed off the canyon walls. Bold words for a man who's outnumbered. "But I've got something that might change your mind," he gestured, and a 5th rider emerged from the ravine, leading a riderless horse. Slumped across the saddle was a man, hands bound, head lolling. "Recognize him?" Tucker called. Sarah squinted, trying to make out the figure's features. "It's Tom Bradley, the banker from Sweetwater," Zane said quietly to Sarah. "The one you were going to file your claim with." Horror washed over her. "Are they going to kill him?" "Not if they think he's more valuable alive," Zane replied grimly. "They need him to make your claim legal." "Here's the deal, Sullivan," Tucker shouted. "Send out the girl with the deed and we'll let both you and Bradley live, otherwise." He made a slashing motion across his throat. "What do we do?" Sarah whispered, desperation clawing at her. Zane's jaw tightened as he assessed their situation. "I need you to trust me," he said finally, turning to look directly into her eyes. "I do," Sarah replied without hesitation, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Then follow my lead." He raised his voice. "We need proof Bradley's alive, Tucker." There was a pause, then Tucker nodded to one of his men who dismounted and approached the bound figure. He yanked Bradley's head up by the hair, revealing a face bruised but recognizably alive. "Satisfied?" Tucker called. "Not quite," Zane replied. "Let him speak." Tucker scowled but motioned for his man to remove the gag from Bradley's mouth. "Miss Blackwell," the banker called weakly, "is that you? Don't give them the deed. Your father, the bandit, struck him, cutting off his words." "That's enough," Tucker snapped. "You've got 1 minute to decide, Sullivan. Then Bradley gets a bullet and we come in shooting." Zane pulled back from the edge of the boulder. "When I give the signal, I want you to run for the horses," he told Sarah in a low voice. "There's a way out through that crevice behind us. It's narrow, but Ruby can make it. Get to Sweetwater and find Marshal Davis. Tell him everything." "What about you?" Sarah demanded. "What about Mr. Bradley?" "I'll create a diversion," Zane said, checking his revolver. "Try to free Bradley in the confusion." "That's suicide," Sarah hissed. "Maybe." His eyes softened as they met hers. "But it's your best chance." "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "I have a better idea." Quickly, she outlined her plan. Zane listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to grudging admiration. "It's risky," he said when she'd finished. "So is your plan to get yourself killed," Sarah countered. "At least this way we both have a chance." Zane studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if anything goes wrong, it won't," Sarah assured him more confidently than she felt. "Time's up," Tucker shouted. "What's it going to be?" Zane took a deep breath, then called back. "We're coming out, don't shoot." He turned to Sarah one last time. "Ready?" She nodded, her heart pounding. "Ready." Together they stood and stepped out from behind the boulders, hands raised. Sarah had tucked the leather pouch visibly into her belt, making sure Tucker could see it. "Smart decision," Tucker said as they approached, his men keeping their rifles trained on them. "Now, toss over that pouch, girl." "First, release Mr. Bradley," Sarah demanded, her voice steadier than she expected. Tucker laughed. "You're not in a position to negotiate." "The deed has a condition written into it," Sarah bluffed. "My father was cautious. It requires the banker's signature to transfer ownership along with mine. Kill him and the deed becomes worthless." Tucker's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Is that true?" he demanded of Bradley. The banker, catching on quickly, nodded. "Standard procedure for valuable claims these days, too many unscrupulous characters around," Tucker swore under his breath. "Fine, untie him," he ordered one of his men. As the bandit moved to comply, Zane tensed beside Sarah, the signal they'd agreed upon. In one fluid motion, Sarah ducked and rolled to the side while Zane drew his revolver with lightning speed, firing twice in rapid succession. The first shot struck Tucker's right-hand man in the chest, sending him tumbling from his horse. The second hit another bandit's rifle, knocking it from his grasp. Chaos erupted. The remaining bandits opened fire as Zane dove for cover behind a rock outcropping, dragging Sarah with him. Bradley, seeing his chance, kicked out at the man untying him, knocking him off balance, then rolled off the horse despite his bound hands. "Now," Zane shouted to Sarah, laying down covering fire as she sprinted for the boulder where they'd left their guns. She reached her pistol just as one of Tucker's men rounded the rocks, his revolver aimed at her heart. Without hesitation, Sarah fired her last bullet, striking him in the shoulder. He staggered backward, dropping his weapon. Sarah snatched up his fallen gun and turned to see Tucker himself bearing down on her, rage contorting his features. She raised the revolver, but before she could fire, a shot rang out from across the canyon. Tucker jerked in his saddle, a look of surprise crossing his face. Blood blossomed on his chest as he toppled slowly from his horse. Zane emerged from behind a boulder, rifle smoking. The last of Tucker's men, seeing their leader fall, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. "It's over," Zane called, keeping his rifle trained on the surviving bandit. Sarah hurried to where Bradley lay behind a horse, still bound. She quickly untied his hands. "Are you all right, Mr. Bradley?" she asked, helping him to sit up. The banker nodded shakily. "Thanks to you and Mr. Sullivan. They ambushed me on the road from Sweetwater, somehow knew I was expecting you." Zane approached, keeping a wary eye on their prisoner. "Tucker must have had informants in town." He checked Sarah over with concern. "You're not hurt?" She shook her head, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I'm fine, thanks to your shooting." Your plan worked perfectly, Zane acknowledged with a hint of pride. Quick thinking with that bluff about the deed. Not entirely a bluff, Bradley interjected, brushing dust from his clothes. While not legally required, having a banker witness a claim transfer is indeed standard practice for valuable properties. Zane secured the surviving bandit, binding his hands with a length of rope from his saddlebag. We need to get to Sweetwater. Report this to Marshal Davis, get Bradley proper medical attention. And file my claim, Sarah added firmly. Zane nodded, a curious expression crossing his face as he looked at her admiration mixed with something deeper, something that made Sarah's breath catch. And file your claim, he agreed softly. They gathered the horses and prepared to depart, Sarah pausing to retrieve the leather pouch that had nearly cost them all their lives. As she tucked it securely back into her shirt, she caught Zane watching her, his expression unguarded for once. What? She asked. Your father would be proud, he said simply. The words warmed her more than she could express. As they rode out of the canyon, the surviving bandit in tow and Bradley sharing Zane's horse, Sarah found herself wondering what would happen once they reached Sweetwater. Would Zane collect his bounty and move on to the next job? The thought left her feeling strangely hollow, but that was a concern for tomorrow. Today they had survived and her father's legacy was secure. For now, that was enough. The ride to Sweetwater passed without further incident, though Zane remained vigilant, clearly concerned about other members of the Tucker gang who might be lying in wait. They reached the outskirts of town just as twilight was settling over the land, the windows of Sweetwater's scattered buildings beginning to glow with lamplight. Sweetwater was a small but growing settlement, built around a natural spring that gave the town its name. A single main street lined with wooden buildings formed the heart of the community, a general store, saloon, small hotel, and various other businesses necessary for frontier life. At the far end stood the marshal's office, its windows glowing warmly in the gathering darkness. Their arrival caused an immediate stir. It wasn't every day that 4 riders came into town at dusk, one of them the respected town banker looking worse for wear, another a bound prisoner, and a third a woman in men's clothing with a blood-stained bandage visible beneath her collar. Marshal Davis emerged from his office as they reined in, his weathered face registering shock at the sight of the banker. Bradley, good Lord, man, what happened to you? Kidnapped, Bradley replied wearily as Zane helped him dismount. By the Tucker gang. Would be dead if not for Mr. Sullivan and Miss Blackwell here. Davis turned his attention to Zane, recognition dawning. Sullivan, heard you were operating in these parts. His gaze shifted to their prisoner. And this would be Pete Rollins, Zane supplied, one of James Tucker's men. Tucker himself is dead along with 2 others, back in a box canyon about 10 miles north. The marshal let out a low whistle, then nodded to his deputy who had appeared in the doorway. Take Rollins inside and lock him up. I'll want statements from all of you. As the deputy led the prisoner away, Davis turned his attention to Sarah. And you must be Jonathan Blackwell's daughter. Bradley mentioned you'd be coming. Sorry about your pa, miss. He was a good man. Thank you, Marshal, Sarah said, touched by the unexpected condolence. You 3 look like you could use a hot meal and a place to rest, Davis observed. Doc Miller should take a look at those injuries too. Why don't you get settled at the hotel and we can handle statements and the claim business in the morning? Sarah opened her mouth to protest. She wanted the deed filed immediately, but Zane placed a gentle hand on her arm. The morning will be soon enough, he said quietly. You're exhausted and Bradley needs medical attention. Recognizing the wisdom in his words, Sarah nodded reluctantly. The Sweetwater Hotel was a modest 2-story structure with clean, if simple, accommodations. The proprietor, Mrs. Henderson, clucked sympathetically over Sarah's bedraggled appearance and Bradley's injuries. You poor dears. I'll have hot water sent up immediately and some food from the kitchen. She turned to Zane. Will you be wanting 1 room or 2, Mr. Sullivan, Zane supplied, and 2 rooms, please, 1 for the lady and 1 for myself and Mr. Bradley, Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose slightly at the arrangement. A single woman traveling with 2 men was unusual enough to raise questions, but she handed over the keys without comment. After a brief visit from the town doctor, who pronounced Bradley bruised but not seriously injured and changed Sarah's bandage with fresh dressing, They gathered in the hotel's small dining room for a hot meal of beef stew and fresh bread. "First thing tomorrow, we'll file your claim properly," Bradley assured Sarah between mouthfuls. "With the Tuckers dealt with, there shouldn't be any more trouble." Sarah nodded gratefully, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Specifically on the man sitting across from her, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since they arrived in town. "What will you do after you collect the bounty?" she asked Zane directly. He looked up from his meal, surprise flickering across his features at the blunt question. "Haven't decided yet," he said after a moment. "There are always more bounties." "Is that what you want?" Sarah pressed. To keep drifting from one job to the next, Bradley, sensing the tension, excused himself with a mumbled comment about needing rest, leaving them alone at the table. Zane studied her face in the soft lamplight. "What else would I do, Sarah?" There was vulnerability in the question that tugged at her heart. "You could stop running," she suggested softly. "Find a place to belong again." Something shifted in his eyes, a yearning quickly masked. "Some men aren't meant to stay in one place. And some men just haven't found the right place yet," Sarah countered. Zane set down his fork, his gaze intent. "What are you saying?" Sarah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "The silver mine will need protection, a manager. Someone who knows the territory and isn't afraid to stand his ground." "You're offering me a job?" Zane asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm offering you a purpose," Sarah clarified. "Beyond just hunting men for money." Zane was silent for a long moment, and Sarah feared she'd overstepped. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I'll think about it," he promised, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. Later, as Sarah prepared for bed in her small room, she found herself replaying that moment, the feel of his hand on hers, the look in his eyes that suggested he might be considering more than just a job offer. It was too soon, she knew. They had only just met, had faced death together, but little else. Yet she couldn't deny the connection between them, forged in danger but deepening with every shared look, every conversation. She fell asleep thinking of storm-gray eyes and wondering what the morning would bring. The next day dawned bright and clear. Sarah woke early, eager to finally secure her father's legacy. After a quick breakfast, she met Zane and Bradley in the hotel lobby, the precious deeds safely tucked in her pocket. "Ready?" Zane asked, his eyes searching hers. Sarah nodded, struck again by how natural it felt to have him by her side, as if they had known each other far longer than the 2 days since their dramatic meeting in the canyon. Bradley's office was a small but neat space attached to Sweetwater's only bank. He settled behind his desk with a satisfied sigh, clearly happy to be back in familiar surroundings. "Now then, Miss Blackwell, let's get this claim properly recorded." He spread out a large ledger and several official-looking documents. "May I see the deed?" Sarah placed the leather pouch on the desk. Bradley carefully extracted the parchment inside, examining it with professional scrutiny. "Everything appears to be in order," he confirmed after a few minutes. "Your father's signature, the survey markings, all correct. All we need now is to register it with the Territorial Mining Office." He dipped a pen in ink and offered it to Sarah. "Sign here, please." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she took the pen. This moment represented the culmination of her father's lifelong dream and the beginning of her own future. She signed with a flourish, emotion tightening her throat. "Congratulations, Miss Blackwell," Bradley said formally, adding his own signature as witness. "You are now the legal owner of the Blackwell silver mine." Zane's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a gesture of quiet support that meant more to Sarah than any words. "What happens now?" she asked Bradley. "I'll dispatch these papers to Santa Fe on tomorrow's stage," the banker explained. "In the meantime, you'll want to secure the mine site itself. Once word gets out about the silver strike, and you'll have all manner of prospectors trying to jump your claim." "I've been thinking about that," Sarah said, glancing at Zane. "I'll need to hire men, trustworthy men who know mining and can protect the site." "I might know a few," Zane offered. "Former marshals, good with both a pick and a gun." Hope fluttered in Sarah's chest at his words. Did this mean he was considering her offer? Their business concluded, they stepped back onto Sweetwater's Main Street just as Marshal Davis approached, looking pleased. "Good news," he announced. "Rollins started talking after a night in my jail." Says there are 2 more Tucker gang members holed up at a line shack about 20 miles west of here. I'm organizing a posse to ride out this afternoon. Zane's expression sharpened with interest. I'll ride with you. Sarah felt a pang of disappointment. Of course he would go. The remaining Tuckers represented both a threat to her claim and a substantial bounty. Be back by nightfall, Zane told her, seeming to sense her feelings. We have more to discuss. The words carried a promise that warmed her despite her concerns. Be careful, she said softly. His eyes held hers for a long moment. Count on it. After Zane departed with the marshal's posse, Sarah spent the day making practical arrangements. She purchased supplies, hired a wagon and driver for the journey to the mine site, and sent telegrams to several mining engineers recommended by Bradley. By late afternoon, she had accomplished all she could and found herself pacing the hotel's small lobby, watching the street for any sign of the returning posse. Mrs. Henderson, observing her restlessness, brought her a cup of tea. Waiting's always the hardest part, the older woman remarked kindly, especially when it's someone special you're waiting for. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Sullivan and I are just associates. Mrs. Henderson's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. If you say so, dear. But I've been running this hotel for 20 years and I know that look. What look? Sarah asked defensively. The one you both had at breakfast this morning, like you were the only 2 people in the room. The hotelier patted Sarah's hand. Life's too short out here to waste time denying what's right in front of you. Before Sarah could formulate a response, shouts from the street drew their attention. The posse was returning, dust rising from their horses' hooves as they rode into town. Sarah hurried outside, scanning the riders anxiously until she spotted Zane near the back of the group. Relief washed over her, followed by alarm as she realized he was supporting another rider who appeared to be wounded. The posse dismounted in front of the marshal's office, 2 men leading prisoners with bound hands. Zane helped the injured man down, then looked up and caught sight of Sarah. Even from a distance, she could see tension leave his shoulders at the sight of her. She hurried across the street, reaching him just as Doc Miller arrived to tend to the wounded deputy. Are you hurt? She demanded, her eyes searching him for injuries. Not a scratch, Zane assured her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Worried about me, Miss Blackwell? Merely concerned about my potential mine manager, Sarah replied primly, though she couldn't quite suppress her smile. Zane's expression turned serious. We got them both. The Tucker gang is finished. Good, Sarah said fervently. Did they resist? One did. Zane's voice was flat. The other surrendered. He'll stand trial along with Rollins. Marshal Davis approached, looking pleased despite his obvious fatigue. Fine work today, Sullivan. The territory's a safer place without the Tuckers. He handed Zane several folded papers. Your bounty vouchers. You can cash them at the bank tomorrow. Zane accepted the papers with a nod of thanks, tucking them into his vest pocket. I've taken the liberty of arranging dinner for us at the hotel, Sarah told him. You must be hungry after your ride. Something flickered in Zane's eyes' surprise, followed by a warmth that made her breath catch. I could eat, he acknowledged. They walked back to the hotel side by side, not touching, yet somehow more connected than they had been before his departure. Sarah was acutely aware of his presence beside her, of the subtle shift in their relationship that had occurred without either of them acknowledging it directly. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a private dining room for them, with a table set with the hotel's best china and a bottle of wine, a luxury in the frontier town. This is unexpected, Zane remarked as they were seated. I thought we deserved to celebrate, Sarah explained. The claim is filed, the Tucker gang is defeated, and… She hesitated, then continued more softly, and you came back safely. Zane studied her across the table, his expression thoughtful. You know, when I found you in that canyon, I was just doing what any decent man would do. And now? Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. Now I'm wondering what comes next, he admitted. For both of us. The server arrived with their meal, momentarily halting their conversation. When they were alone again, Sarah gathered her courage. Have you thought about my offer to manage the mine? Zane took a sip of wine before answering. I have. It's generous and it would be steady work. But, Sarah prompted, sensing his hesitation. But I've been on my own a long time, Sarah. Not sure I remember how to stay in one place. Perhaps you just need the right reason to stay, Sarah suggested, holding his gaze steadily despite the color she could feel rising in her cheeks. Zane set down his glass, his expression intensifying. And what reason would that be? Sarah took a deep breath. When I was a little girl, my father used to tell me that silver wasn't the most valuable thing he was searching for. He said he was looking for a place where we could belong, where we could build something lasting. She reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of his. I think I've found that place, Zane, and I think perhaps you have too. Zane looked down at her hand, then slowly, deliberately covered it with his own. You don't know much about me, Sarah. I know enough, she replied simply. I know you're a good man. I know you risked your life for a stranger. I know there's more to you than the bounties you hunt. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. What are you saying exactly? I'm saying I want you to stay, Sarah admitted, not just as my mine manager, as. Words failed her, but her eyes conveyed what she couldn't articulate: the connection she felt, the possibilities she saw. Zane was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intimate. I haven't felt this way since Elizabeth died. Didn't think I could feel this way again. And how do you feel? Sarah asked, barely above a whisper. Like maybe there's a reason I was in that canyon when you needed me, like maybe it wasn't just chance. He turned her hand over, his fingertips tracing the lines of her palm. Like maybe I've been wandering long enough. Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest, bright and warm. Does that mean you'll stay? It means I'm willing to try, Zane replied, his expression softening. One day at a time. It wasn't a declaration of love, but Sarah hadn't expected one. What existed between them was too new, too fragile for grand pronouncements. But it was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. They finished their meal talking of practical matters, plans for the mine, the workers they would need to hire, the housing to be built. Yet underlying every word was the awareness of something deeper taking root between them, a connection neither had sought, but both now treasured. As they parted for the night in the hotel hallway, Zane hesitated, then reached out to tuck a stray strand of hair behind Sarah's ear, his fingertips lingering against her cheek. Good night, Sarah Blackwell, he said softly. Good night, Zane Sullivan, she replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. She watched him walk to his door, feeling as though her life had somehow been divided into two parts: before the canyon and after. The journey to the mine site took 2 days of hard travel. Sarah rode Ruby, while Zane alternated between riding his stallion and driving the wagon loaded with supplies and equipment. They were accompanied by 2 men Zane had recommended, former miners named Peterson and Doyle, both handy with tools and guns alike. The Blackwell claim was situated in a remote valley surrounded by pine-covered mountains, a small stream providing water year-round. Sarah had visited only once before, shortly after her father's discovery, and approaching it now stirred mixed emotions: grief for her father who would never see his dream realized, and hope for the future she was building from his legacy. A crude cabin stood near the mine entrance, built by her father during the months he had worked the claim alone. Seeing it brought tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away, not wanting the men to see her weakness. But Zane noticed, as he seemed to notice everything about her. He dismounted beside her, his hand coming to rest briefly on her shoulder. He'd be proud, he said quietly. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The next weeks were a flurry of activity. More workers arrived: miners, carpenters, a cook, and 2 more guards. The original cabin was expanded, additional housing built, and work on the mine itself began in earnest. The silver vein proved to be even richer than Jonathan Blackwell had claimed, and the first shipment of ore to the assayer in Santa Fe brought back returns that confirmed Sarah's standing as a wealthy woman through it all. Zane remained by her side. He proved to be an excellent manager, his natural authority and fairness earning the respect of the workers. In the evenings, he and Sarah would sit on the porch of the main cabin, discussing the day's work and planning for the future. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. Their relationship evolved naturally, without rush or pressure. A touch of hands as they reviewed ledgers, a shared smile across the dining table, long conversations under star-filled skies, each moment drawing them closer together. One evening, about a month after their arrival at the mine, Sarah found Zane alone on the porch, staring out at the mountains with an unreadable expression. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling into the chair beside his. Zane glanced at her, a smile warming his features. "They're worth at least a nickel," Sarah laughed, the sound carrying in the quiet evening. "Inflation, very well, a nickel it is." His expression grew more serious. "I was thinking about my life before that day in the canyon, how empty it was, even though I didn't realize it at the time." Sarah's heart quickened. "And now I wake up each morning with a purpose beyond just surviving another day." His eyes held hers, the intensity in them making her breath catch. "Because of you, Sarah, me," she whispered. "You." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "You brought me back to life, made me remember there are things worth fighting for beyond justice and bounties, made me want to build something lasting, just like your father dreamed of." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood," she admitted. "After my father died, I felt so alone, but then you rode into that canyon and somehow it felt right," Zane finished for her, his voice rough with emotion. "Like coming home even though I'd never been there before." "Yes," Sarah whispered, the single word containing all she couldn't express. Zane stood, drawing her to her feet before him. In the fading light, his eyes were the color of twilight, filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I'm not a man of many words, Sarah Blackwell, but I need you to know this. I love you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing your ground against those bandits, bloodied but unbroken." Sarah's tears spilled over at his declaration. "I love you too," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I think I knew it when you told me I'd leave that canyon beside you. Somehow I knew you meant forever." Zane's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently wiping away her tears. "Forever," he echoed, the word a promise. "If you'll have me." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Sullivan?" Sarah asked, her lips curving into a smile despite her tears. "It is," he confirmed, suddenly dropping to one knee before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small ring, a simple silver band set with a single diamond that caught the last rays of the setting sun. "I had this made in Santa Fe from the first silver we shipped. Will you marry me, Sarah? Build that lasting legacy your father dreamed of together." Sarah's heart felt too full for her chest, joy overwhelming her. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Zane Sullivan, I will marry you." Zane slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. His lips found hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened, expressing all the love and promise between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zane rested his forehead against hers. "You know what this means, don't you?" "What?" Sarah asked, still dazed from the kiss. A smile curved his lips. "I really did keep my promise. You left that canyon beside me, and now you'll stay beside me, for good." Sarah laughed, pure happiness bubbling up from her soul. "For good," she agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They were married 2 months later in Sweetwater, with Bradley giving the bride away and Marshall Davis serving as best man. Sarah wore a gown of ivory silk ordered from Denver, while Zane surprised her by trading his usual trail clothes for a proper suit. "You clean up nicely, Mr. Sullivan," she teased as they shared their first dance as husband and wife in the hotel's dining room, cleared for the occasion. "Don't get used to it," he warned, though his eyes sparkled with happiness. "Tomorrow it's back to trail dust and leather." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Sarah assured him, her heart full as she looked at the man who had ridden into her life at her darkest moment and brought light back into it. Their honeymoon was a 2-week trip to San Francisco, where they stayed in the finest hotel, dined in elegant restaurants, and saw their first play together. Yet both admitted to feeling relieved when they returned to the mountains and their growing mining operation. The years that followed brought changes and challenges, but through it all, Sarah and Zane faced life together. The Blackwell Sullivan silver mine prospered, becoming one of the most productive in the territory. They built a proper house on a hill overlooking the mine, large enough for the family they both hoped for, yet still maintaining the simplicity they both preferred. Their first child, a son they named Jonathan Zachary Sullivan, was born on a snowy winter night 2 years after their wedding. Zane paced outside their bedroom as the midwife attended Sarah, his face pale with worry until the first cry of his son rang through the house. "She's asking for you," the midwife told him, her face tired but smiling. Zane entered the bedroom to find Sarah propped up against pillows, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked exhausted but radiant, her smile luminous as she held out their son for him to see. "He has your eyes," she told Zane as he carefully took the infant, all written across his features. "And your determination," Zane replied, noting the strong grip of the tiny fingers around his own. He was in quite a hurry to get here. Like his father rushing into canyons to rescue damsels in distress, Sarah teased, though her eyes shone with love and gratitude. Zane sat carefully on the edge of the bed, one arm holding their son while the other wrapped around Sarah's shoulders. "Best rush I ever made," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for our son, for our life together." "No," Sarah corrected gently. "Thank you for saying those words in the canyon. You'll leave here beside me. You kept your promise, Zane Sullivan." "And I always will," he vowed, the three of them together forming the living legacy Jonathan Blackwell had dreamed of, not just silver, but something far more precious. A family rooted in love and belonging, built to last through all the years to come. 2 years later, their family expanded with the arrival of twin daughters, Elizabeth Rose and Catherine Grace. The house filled with laughter and childish footsteps, with Zane proving to be a devoted father who never tired of bedtime stories or piggyback rides. As the territory moved toward statehood, the small mining community around them grew into a proper town, eventually named Sullivan's Crossing in honor of the man whose leadership had helped it thrive. Sarah, with her business acumen and compassionate heart, became a respected figure in territorial affairs, advocating for schools, medical facilities, and fair treatment of all residents regardless of background. Zane, while content with his role managing the mine and raising their children, occasionally still rode out with Marshal Davis when particularly dangerous criminals threatened the region. Each time he promised Sarah he would return to her, and each time he kept that promise. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zane surprised Sarah by taking her back to Rustler's Canyon, to the very spot where they had first met. A picnic basket in hand, he led her to a flat rock overlooking the site of their fateful encounter. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years, Sarah remarked, gazing down at the canyon floor where she had once stood cornered and afraid. "Best 10 years of my life," Zane replied, unpacking their meal. At 50, his hair was beginning to silver at the temples, but he was still as strong and vital as the day he had ridden to her rescue. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't come along that day?" Sarah asked, accepting the glass of wine he offered. Zane's expression turned serious. "I don't like to think about it, but I do know this finding you was no accident, Sarah. I'd spent years wandering, hunting bounties, telling myself I was serving justice when really I was just running from my grief." "And now," Sarah prompted softly, "now I understand what Elizabeth would have wanted for me, not endless wandering, but this, a home, a family, a purpose." He took Sarah's hand, his thumb brushing over the silver wedding band he had placed there a decade ago. "You gave me that, Sarah, you and our children." Sarah's eyes shimmered with tears. "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently. "That day in the canyon, you saved more than my life. You saved my father's dream, our future. And you saved my soul," Zane countered, raising his glass in a toast. "To 10 years beside you, Sarah Sullivan. And to many more to come." "Many more," Sarah agreed, touching her glass to his as the setting sun painted the canyon walls in gold, just as it had on the day their story began. And in the years that followed, through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, they kept the promise made in that canyon to walk through life side by side, building a legacy of love that would endure long after the silver mine had yielded its last treasure. A legacy passed down through generations of Sullivans who would tell the story of how it all began, with bandits who cornered her in a canyon and a cowboy who vowed, "You'll leave here beside me."